views expressed by our guests are their own and do not reflect the official stance of their employer or any affiliated organizations. Welcome back to the Counsel House Podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Abramoff. Today, we have a great guest, General Counsel of Kraken, Ben Gray. Today, we're going to speak about the compliance and policy aspects of running a very large crypto exchange and Ben's experience in fintech and how they all relate. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So you've got a great background in law. You've been a chief compliance officer, general counsel, dealing with all types of areas with policy. And I'd love to get your thoughts on how all those areas, all within your background, really complement a role like you have at Kraken.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think I'm the chief legal officer at Kraken, and my remit is legal, compliance, and risk. And so the way I broadly explain that is we're responsible for risk management for the organization. Of course, there are risks that don't sit specifically with us. You have things like cybersecurity, InfoSec, things like that. But really our job is to be the group that helps to assess risk, helps to quantify it, and then help businesses make decisions about how they want to move forward with it. So the interesting thing that I've seen in my career, for particularly in financial services, is that these functions, legal, compliance, and risk, are all kind of sides of the same triple-sided coin, if you will. They need to work together hand in glove in order to make a business successful, because you're moving so quickly and you're seeing so many issues of first impression. And when you think about, let's take like launching a product, for example, the way I like to explain the role of these different teams is you have the legal team that's responsible for analyzing the law. They're telling you, do laws apply? Are there specific requirements that we need to meet? The compliance team is responsible for operationalizing that and saying, okay, great. Now we know what the law is. We want to actually push this product out. What do we need to build? Do we need policies? Do we need procedures? How do we actually make sure that once it's live out in the market with customers, that it's going to be above board and meet expectations? And then you have the risk function that's there sort of as a check, and their responsibility is to make sure, okay, now we're out in the wild, things are working. Are they working how we thought they were going to? Do we have risks that are coming up that we didn't expect? And so if you bring these teams together and we can collaborate when we're making decisions and providing advice to our business partners, it's just extremely effective, and you can move way more quickly to make decisions. So that's what kind of excites me about that. And that's a remit that I've had now for the last two companies here and my previous company. And it's something that I think is a competitive advantage in crypto, but also fintech more broadly.
I believe that. And, you look at all different industries, and I think the dream is to be able to link those groups together. But depending on the industry, it could be quite a challenge. Do you find that to be more challenging, less challenging in the crypto world compared to the fintech space?
I think because crypto started from a place of scrutiny, I actually think that people are much more aware of this need than probably in other industries. I think in traditional banks, often what you see is these functions really separate. And there's value to that, by the way. From a governance standpoint, there can be value in saying, okay, we're going to have these functions separate. So it's not a one size fits all. But I think with fintech and crypto, there was kind of an acknowledgement from the very beginning that regulators were going to be paying a ton of attention to this industry, that there was a lot of kind of lack of understanding about what kind of controls were in place. And so these teams needed to work closely together. And the companies that have had challenges with regulators have largely been in this compliance space and lack of licensing, sort of the legal side of things. And so I've actually found companies to be incredibly receptive to the idea that they need to be really good at both of these functions. And if you can find someone who brings them together, that's even better.
Yeah, 100%. And just based off of what you said, obviously there's a lot of unknown out there, a lot of scrutiny. And so that creates sort of a policy puzzle. How does, being the general counsel, how do you look to shape that and shift it?
So it's interesting. I mean, I think what you'll find with policy at a lot of different fintechs is it is intimately tied to the legal function, because what's happening in the policy space, and this is happening literally right now in the United States, is you're building the laws as you're launching products. And so when the policy questions come up, often the question is, okay, what is the product suite that we have? What do the laws need to do to make sure that they adequately account for risk, but also allow us to continue to build these products in a compliant way? And so the lawyers have to work incredibly closely with the product team, much of what the policy team, much of what the policy team ends up going out and advocating for comes directly from what are the product legal team saying needs to be actually in the text of the law. And so the functions work very, very closely together. It's something that I actually think is super interesting and fun to get involved in. So I've been lucky to get to do some of that.
Absolutely. Another rare moment where policy, working with the product team, working with all these teams, it sounds like there's a lot of silos that are broken down and allows all teams to be able to truly thrive because they know each other.
Yeah, definitely. The silo breaking down is really critical. I also think it's, you think about kind of mature companies, often the policy aims are sort of around the margins, right? You're trying to make sure that things that come up, that they don't kind of throw the business that's already a machine on the tracks off. For us, we're like, we just need to make sure that we actually have something in place. For crypto companies for the last few years, particularly in the United States, we were clamoring for just a clear policy framework to be put in place. A lot of, you look across Europe, different markets, they're at different stages of maturity of actually having a framework to regulate crypto. And in the United States, for like a few years, it was basically like putting our heads in the sand. We're not going to do this. That's shifted a lot over the last few months. So that's been encouraging.
Yeah, I can only imagine it looks like a completely different world, actually. We look at traditional banking, right? And when we were talking the other day, you had mentioned that obviously, I think anyone could tell it's completely different than crypto. So just in terms of navigating that and understanding it, how does that affect your job as the chief legal officer?
There are big components that are different than banking, and there are pieces that are very similar, right? I think the regulatory expectations across traditional banking and crypto are actually the same, which is, I think, a good thing because there's predictability to it. I think the challenge comes in when the technology doesn't actually line up to what regulators have seen for the last 50 years. And that is one of the challenges that I think as a general counsel, I have to help navigate, which is you need to be fundamentally very sound on what these expectations are and what it looks like to operate in a traditional banking space. But you also know how to need to know how to translate and say, okay, look, what's the analogy to how this has been operating in the last however many decades? It's not going to look exactly the same, but this is why we still continue to believe that it's safe and it should be offered to our customers. So that's, I think, one thing that's different. Of course, risk tolerance is different. I think typically bigger, more mature companies tend to be a little less tolerant of risk. The interesting thing that I'm seeing happening, though, is both sides are realizing that they depend on one another. So it's not like, I think for the longest time, everyone was like, oh, crypto is going to, completely replace traditional banking. I actually don't believe that. I don't think there's a place for sort of traditional banking and traditional rails. And I think that both sides are kind of now figuring out how do we work with one another and how do we complement one another. And so that's been really interesting.
So historically, fintechs rely on bank partnerships. That obviously is not the case for crypto. So how does that change the competition model and within also the legal landscape for a company like yours?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is I think what I was just alluding to, which is historically, I think everyone thought, yes, this is going to completely replace banks. We don't need them. We can, there's a new set of rails. The fact is, it's not actually going to look exactly like that. The bank partnership model that traditional fintechs have relied on was, I would kind of call it like a white labeling, right? Where you have the bank providing the rails, kind of the infrastructure, but you never saw the brand. It was the brand that was forward facing and the customer experience was created by the fintech. I think I would say that variation for crypto is that they're complementary. It's not a white label, but it's saying, okay, maybe you're continuing to have your traditional banking relationship, but we're going to provide crypto services, and there's going to be another brand attached to that. So it's more a variation than anything else. There is a part of the crypto world that is completely outside of traditional banking, and that's the more kind of DeFi space, which is a beast in and of itself. And I think there's a distinction there between that pure on-chain world where people are just engaging with private wallets and they can engage in financial transactions with other peers, and there's no banking intermediaries. And it's incredibly exciting. And then there's this other variation, which I was just talking about, which is the sort of more centralized exchanges like Kraken, where there is still an important relationship with traditional banking institutions. And so there's gonna be a spectrum.
So without banks as a core piece to this, you are competing against other crypto exchanges. And so how does that shape your legal strategy?
Yeah, I think it creates a lot of pressure. This space moves so quickly. And so from a legal perspective, what we're really trying to understand are what are the bright lines? What can we absolutely not do? Where can we take more risk? How do we make sure we're really, really good at finding that line? You see a convergence right now. What you're seeing is traditional crypto exchanges like Kraken are expanding into adjacent TradFi spaces, are expanding into things like equities trading, which historically you might see at a competitor where that's their core business, is offering kind of equities trading to their customers. And then those equities companies are now expanding into the crypto exchange space. And so there's this convergence where every fintech wants to offer all of the services. And so that's exciting, but it means your competitive landscape just expands exponentially, because all of a sudden you thought, oh, I've only got 2 or 3 people I'm competing with. And now it's like, no, you're competing with everyone, because everyone is trying to do everything. So, when that happens in industries, a couple of things happen. I think in crypto, what I'm excited about is I actually think the pie is huge, way bigger than people are giving it credit for right now. It's not a kind of a zero-sum game where there can only be 2 winners. We're seeing this, like the market opportunity. I think we're just scratching the surface of actual usage and penetration around the world. And so I think it's great that we have all of this competition, but it does mean that we need to be jacks of all trade. We need to understand not just crypto, but you need to understand TradFi. You need to be able to figure out how to build a legal culture within your team that is one of speed. It's one of risk tolerance. It's one of creativity. It's one of real business partnership. It's where you know how to kind of go to your business partners and say, look, here's a menu of options. We can go this route. It's going to sacrifice X. We can go this route. It might be safer, but it's going to sacrifice Y. And really be partners to them in making those decisions.
That's amazing. And you talk about departments like these having to face so many different types of regulatory challenges or litigation challenges, new products, new competitors. It sounds like the legal department is constantly moving and shifting and growing, really, which I think could allow what we were talking about before, all these teams to comfortably fit under one umbrella in a way where everyone is providing value and not feeling like, why am I a part of this larger group when I don't necessarily directly impact this? It sounds like everyone is impactful.
Everyone's impactful. I mean, I think one of the things that's really important to me as a legal leader, is to give context to folks on how they fit into the overall success of the business. We are business partners. We're business owners. And I really try to drive that mentality with people, because it's easy to get labeled as the team that is stopping things or is friction. And I think, sometimes that happens. That's part of our job, is to protect. But the other side of that coin is that we need to be enabling the business to grow. And I think if you can show people that, and show the teams, whether it's compliance, risk, or legal, that they do have a real role in growing the business, that motivates people. It helps them to understand the importance of their work and also feel appreciated.
Yeah. And while they have a lot of different things that they are continuously learning and refreshing on, I think that has to be satisfactory feeling for an attorney, to continuously learn more and offer different types of value that they honestly wouldn't have even thought they could.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the coolest part about being an in-house lawyer. Often people ask, I've had the privilege of being in government. I've been in private practice as a law firm attorney, and I've been in-house for well over a decade now. And to me, the thing that I love about being an in-house lawyer is just the sort of unpredictability of it. The fact that you get to see a range of issues. People really look to you not just as a lawyer, but as a business partner. I think the most successful in-house lawyers are people who understand the business deeply And so one of the things that I try to do for my teams is give opportunities for people to flex into areas that maybe they're not an expert in. I had a boss at one of my previous roles who would bring the entire leadership team together, the legal compliance leadership team together on a weekly basis, and we would address issues. And there was a real encouragement for people to speak up, even outside their areas of domain expertise, to just sort of say, hey, like, this is what I've seen before. This doesn't pass the sniff test. I don't understand this. And it's just the best way to actually learn and become a generalist. People often ask, how do you become a chief legal officer? How do you become a general counsel? And my advice is always seek out opportunities to be exposed to as much as humanly possible. And the best way to do that is in-house.
100%. And to force yourself to be a generalist, really. Like, you talked about having your experience in government, at law firms, in corporate. Those are all areas you're going to learn very valuable skills that might not have directly to do with each other, but very similar. So I think that's excellent advice. So crypto lacks regulatory scaffolding that banks have. How do you manage that uncertainty?
It's really challenging. And again, I spoke to this a little bit earlier. I would say the world as a whole is in a different set of phases, depending on which jurisdiction you're talking about. So Europe actually has a law called MiCA that they passed, which is probably the most comprehensive crypto legislation that exists today. It has a bunch of benefits the clarity piece is really helpful because people actually know what the guardrails look like. It also has a lot of challenges as companies kind of work through the practicalities of what was written into the law and see, oh, maybe this doesn't actually work. So I think to answer your question more directly, what we have to do as leaders in the crypto space is to look at each jurisdiction and really understand, okay, where are they on that curve? Are there laws that are being proposed? Great. If that's the case, we need to partner very, very closely with our policy colleagues and make sure that what they're actually putting out is going to be fit for purpose, is going to allow for innovation, is going to allow for the right kinds of safeguards. Okay, well, let's look at Europe. They actually have a regime in place. Great. How do we get licensed under that regime? What's that going to look like? What are the different regulators that we could be partnering with? How do we make sure we are launching products that are compliant? And so it's a different set of skills depending on where the scaffolding is, but it's a huge part of what we do. And I think if you look at any fintech, many of the companies are actually overweight from a regulatory staffing perspective because you have to be. Someone was asking me the other day, how do you benchmark legal teams in fintechs? And I said, they're going to look way bigger than in most companies. And I think any CEO or any business leader should just expect that because we operate in this heavily regulated space.
Yeah. And you have so many different products, which only expands it more. Yeah. And to your point, just saying that now is that you don't know what's going to happen. So it's better to be bigger than smaller when something might hit the fan and you have that extra protection.
Yeah. And it's not even so much about size, like absolute size. It's about breadth of experience and depth of experience. That's really where I focus because I think actually what we found is more people doesn't necessarily make you more effective, but having the right people is really the key. We, I think, in the crypto space are in a great spot right now. People want to be in this space. Lawyers are excited to learn. And I think it really requires a learning mindset because even if you've been in crypto for, let's say, 5 to 10 years, there's really no one who's been in it for longer than that because it's such a new industry. But let's say you are like experienced. You come in and all of a sudden your product teams are like, hey, we want to launch this thing. And it's like something you've never seen. And you're kind of like, okay, well, how do I take laws that don't apply to this? This is an issue I've never seen before. And how do I give legal advice based on that? So I find that really exciting, but it does require a specific skill set and a desire.
I think it would have to, right? It's the skill of constantly wanting to learn more while drawing from past experience, while accepting the fact that things are changing so quickly that your experience may or may not matter.
That's exactly it. But then all of a sudden you're the expert, right? Like that's the amazing part about it. And so that I think is really energizing.